The eyes might be the window into the soul, but that's not why Margaret Keane made them the focus of her work. A mastoid operation was actually responsible. It damaged her hearing, and she grew up studying people's faces, just to better understand what they were saying. It's a simple story, but her art is anything but. It has a haunted and gloomy quality, and some found it tasteless, kitschy, and even scary. Keane said those words were hurtful, but she brooded over them in private, because the funny thing is, no one actually knew Keane was the artist. Her husband Walter said the paintings would be easier to sell if he took credit for her work. Margaret later told the New York Times she regretted not standing up to him right away. But make no mistake, she eventually did. The couple divorced, and Keane announced on the radio that she was the one who created all those big-eyed characters. A court battle ensued in 1986, and a judge ordered a paint-off in front of a jury. Margaret made her picture in under an hour. Meanwhile, Walter declined, claiming his shoulder was too sore. Accolades would follow for decades. They included a biopic, shot by Tim Burton, and the LA Art Show gave Margaret Keane a Lifetime Achievement Award. It's crazy to think what would have happened if Walter Keane's shoulder had been in good shape.
You don't even know what the truth is!
Let's speak to mixed media visual artist Alexandre Aimee. Hi there, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. Now, it's such an interesting story, of course, and you made a whole YouTube video talking about it. Tell us why you called her an inspiration in that video and why you wanted to focus on this artist.
First of all, thank you so much for having me here. It is an absolute honor to be able to talk about Margaret with you guys. I started my YouTube project very selfishly. I wanted to explore more about the artists who shaped me to the core. And Margaret was one of the top ones, not only for what she paints, but also her story and her resilience. I find as a woman, it is something to look up to, that no matter what happens to you in life, it's how you deal with it after. It's what you make of it after. It's not to I think so inspiring about Margaret Keane.
Right, and well, again, just like you said, it's a story of resilience as well, and a lot of people found out about it through Tim Burton's movie Big Eyes. And she said it was a very emotional, tough experience, almost a traumatic experience for her to watch that movie. I wonder how, because you made a huge research about Margaret Keane, I saw in your YouTube video, how did she approach this movie and how did she feel after that?
I think that movie is a great example of a love letter to an artist. I know she's one of Tim Burton's favorite artists, and he put a lot of love and care. I believe it took them 11 years to finally get all the research to make sure everything was fact-checked. And I can tell you that there's only one detail in the movie that's kind of wrong, but it's not that bad. And that's basically that the trial between Margaret Keane and her husband Walter, who was pretending to be the creator of her work for their entire career, their court case almost lasted a good 20 years. It didn't happen right away. It didn't happen in a span of 2 years. This whole debate of her trying to reclaim her power lasted very long. But besides that, the film really, they got all the details right, the emotions right. Also, for my research, I know that Margaret and her family are very private. So to reopen these wounds for anyone would be very, very hard. But I'm so thankful they did, because not just me, but so many people can learn from the story. Because I'm sure this is something that happens to a lot of people. They just don't have the chance to talk about it, having people taking credit for your work.
Mm-hmm.
But because she was able to talk about it and the whole scandal it developed, it almost became a cultural phenomenon. But yeah, so I would say the movie, the only thing that they did different was in real life, it lasted longer. And then apparently Walter too was even more erratic in the court scene. So if you haven't seen the movie by Tim Burton, that's definitely a place to start. It is an absolute love letter to Margaret Keane and her daughter Jane.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think what's interesting to think about is what her career might have come to had it not been for her husband. I'm saying it in the opposite direction. I mean, under the light of how male dominated the art world was back then and still is. So if people knew that these paintings belonged to a woman, do you think she would have been this successful?
Honestly, that is such a great point because the reality is probably not. I honestly believe that the whole situation, I think the movie got it right. It didn't start off that he was gonna like saying like I'm gonna steal your art. I think it really started with little white lies that expanded into bigger lies. But I strongly believe that the Big Eye's career would have never been without Walter because you can say what you want about this man. He knew how to sell an art piece. So to be a famous artist or be able to live off your art, you must have the artistic skill, but also the business of art. So at the end of the day, I don't think there could be Big Eyes without Margaret or Walter. Or if Walter didn't exist, maybe we would have never been able to actually hear the story of Margaret. So it's also an example of everything does happen for a reason, even though the roads might be very bumpy. At the end of the day, Margaret came victorious on top. But like you said, I honestly believe because of the climate, especially of that time, and especially what she was living as a divorced and remarried woman in a time where people did not get divorced in America, that must have been very hard. But I don't think there could be one without the other. So it's kind of a beautiful disaster and story that it wouldn't able the story wouldn't exist without all the bad parts. So it's very something you need to look at the whole picture.
Mhm. And these paintings appealed to the masses, obviously, but then not all art critics loved it. So you're an artist yourself, and you, again, made a whole research about this artist, Margaret Keane. What do you think? What is your personal take on the aesthetic quality of her works?
Well, me personally, I've always loved the intricate, the little weird. So for me, I was definitely one of those demographics, but I also think she was ahead of her time. Um, her her fame really started later on with next generations. But the reason why they got so famous is because they pretty much started the mainstream appeal of print art, which is something that the art world was not a fan of because it's basically just copies of the art. It's not the original piece. So I must say that they were very rebellious. And I do think that her art, not only for the content, but what they were doing, they really set a precedent to how art works nowadays. Now, most artists do print. Before Walter Keane, no one really did prints. So I think then what they did is they saw there was a big want. People wanted their paintings, they couldn't afford them, so they found a way. So they didn't master the business of art. They were able to open their own gallery
Hmm.
in a time frame that most artists that make way more money wouldn't be able to. So it was kind of a gimmick. That is absolutely true. But when it comes to the bigger story, it makes sense. But also, if you look at Margaret Keane's work from the beginning to when she was with Walter and later, you can really see how she felt through her images. You can tell that she was a prisoner when she was with Walter.
Hmm.
So I think that is also interesting in the legacy of her work.
I mean, what you've just described really corresponds with what Andy Warhol said about her art. He said, I think what Keane has done is terrific. If it were bad, so many people wouldn't have liked it, referring to the New York World's Fair. Could you actually tell us what exactly happened at that fair? Because obviously a New York Times critic bashed her works, his works, and then they were withdrawn. But could you please tell the story? We have a few minutes left.
So at the World Fair, they were commissioned to, well, he was commissioned to do their biggest masterpiece yet. But the reality of anyone that creates or does art, a masterpiece doesn't just happen that way. So the painting did feel very rushed. Even Margaret was not satisfied with it, but it was all Walter wanting fast production. That's what happened is they started producing really fast, doing prints, little factory. And I think art is so subjective. No matter what, someone is going to see in it. But when it came to that piece in particular, it was so rushed that it wasn't finished. And I think that people that have an eye of art could see maybe that was the first sign where there's like, okay, there's something fishy going on with this artist here. Something doesn't feel right. So I think people kind of caught on the lie that was eventually going to be outed, which I'm sure that when they found out the critics that were following the Keane's career, when they did find out it was Margaret, I'm sure it changed their whole perspective too on the artist duo.
Very interesting point.
So there's that too.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're out of time. Alexandre, Aimee, it was very good to have you with us today. Thanks so much.